In today's episode, former QPAT President Heidi Yetman, who is now the president of CTF-FCE, will be having a conversation with Jan Langelier. Jan Edith Davidson Langelier has worked as a phys ed teacher, a French as a second language teacher, and an immersion teacher. From 1986 to 1989, Jan was the president of the then Lakeshore Teachers Association, and from 1992 to 1998, Jan held the position of the president of the former PAPT, which then became known as QPAT. Jan has also worked as a vice principal and a principal. Now, Jan retired in the June of 2009. However, since then, here are some of the things that she has done. She has been part of the board of the Quebec Provincial Association of Retired School Educators. Oh, and she was also their president. She was part of the board of l'Association of Retired School Educators. Oh, and she was also their president. In addition to that, she worked as an instructor of student teachers and a supervisor for these teachers for the McGill Education Department. She has been the executive director of the AAESQ from 2018 to just this past June of 2023. Some of her favorite pastimes include her 6 grandchildren, choral singing, golf, bicycling, fitness, reading, and church. Enjoy today's episode.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm so excited today because I get to speak with Jan. And Jan and I have been working in the same office for about 4 years. And Jan, I got to read your bio actually this morning, and I am so impressed. Oh my goodness me. The list just goes on, and then there's a point where you retire, and then it just keeps going. So tell me a little bit about your leadership journey, because a lot of the things that you've done over the years have been in leadership positions. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, actually, I don't ever really remember thinking about it as being a leadership position. It was more as I went along. Right early on in my career, I had been raised. I should go back even further than that. My dad was a teacher, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom, and I'm a 1950s baby. So that was the generation where, that was the tradition. What was not traditional was that my mother encouraged us all. I'm one of 4. I have a sister and 2 brothers, but regardless of being female or male, my mother always encouraged us to choose what we wanted to do and to just do it. And my father would say to us, I don't care what you choose to do as long as you do it 100%.
Wow.
So that was kind of the way I was raised. And so when I would go in, from the time I was very early involved in teaching, if there was a problem that arose, I couldn't just sit back and let there be a problem. I had to ask questions. I had to challenge some of the decisions that were being made by leaders at the time. And it caused me then to be put in positions where I was, I guess, in leadership in a sense, because I was challenging the status quo in some cases. And the other thing was that I always was encouraged by not just my parents, but also by my husband at the time, that if there was something that came up, a window opened, and I felt maybe I could do it, that I was encouraged to do it, to try. And so there were often, and I've learned over my very long career, that there are often times when a door will close, and with almost never exception, not long after, a window will open. And what you have to be able to say is that you're willing and able to see that window and to step through it. Yeah. To take it and be something different to what maybe you was in your comfort zone or what you were doing. The other thing was that I guess I maybe was a bit, HD, what is it, hyperactivity person. Because
I look at your bio, I feel that way.
I couldn't do the same thing for longer than about 5 years before I got antsy about wanting to do something else.
Yeah.
And I would start I guess unconsciously, because it was never a conscious decision. I never planned to become the president of the Lakeshore Teachers Association, for example. I didn't ever plan to be the president of PAPT. It happened, and I was willing to try it and go forward with it. So that was kind of my personality partly, but also the way I had been raised, which was not to be afraid to try to do something and then to do it really well as you could possibly do it. So
you had a lot of allies then.
I did.
Your husband at the time who said you got to walk through those doors, and you were curious, like you said. I think that's kind of how I started too, is out of curiosity and asking a lot of questions, and then realizing that I wasn't getting the right answers, or the answers that I thought I should get.
Or the answers that you wanted to get. Yeah.
Exactly. So asking a lot of questions and being curious, I think, is really important. What were some of the biggest challenges, though? Like, I'm thinking as a woman, like moving through all these leadership positions that you had.
The biggest challenge was myself. The argument I had always with myself about whether or not what I was choosing to do was interfering with my personal life or with my children when they were younger, and whether it was right for me to be holding my own profession over the needs that my family had, for example, or for that matter, even, when I was teaching, I often would say, well, if I'm doing all of these other activities, is it interfering with my ability to be a good teacher? So and that I think comes from the background of being challenged always to do everything at 100%. And to be fair, the biggest challenge is doing everything at 100%. At some point, you have to give and take,
right?
In order for you to take the challenges that take you away from being 100% a mother, for example, or 100% a teacher. You have to be ready to make some choices, and it sometimes was very hard for me to do that. I must admit, to make those choices, or to hear from, I'll never forget my mother-in-law, who was very, very staid Catholic, French Catholic woman, when she heard I was expecting my first child, and she said to me, well, that's it, then you'll be staying home from now on. And I looked at her and I said, no, I will not. And we had this ongoing kind of not a confrontation, but she was like absolutely against the fact that I would be continuing on to do to follow my career. Little did she know there wasn't just being a teacher; it was going to be everything else that I added on to being a teacher that was adding to the portfolio, shall we say? So yeah,
exactly. Well, it's funny how women are asked those questions. Well, what about your children? But men are never asked those questions. Shouldn't you be staying home? Like, shouldn't you be watching the kids? Like, so I find that really interesting. That I think that's a very women thing, that women are associated as mothers and therefore should be the primary caregivers. I hope that we're slowly getting out of that. But I still think it exists.
I worked really hard through my leadership career to change that mentality. Things like, maternity benefits and leave for family purposes, and all of those things that made it possible for women to be able to take on and do the jobs that were required of them. And one could also argue that the paternity side of things was included in that too, so that the men were given opportunities to take up the challenge of child care, for example. So those were the battles. When I think back, to the beginning of my career as in union leadership, was those kinds of things, was basic, what are today are considered basic rights. In those days, we didn't have maternity benefits. We didn't have paternity, forget it. There was no such thing as paternity at the time. So those things were all things that we fought hard for over our young years as union leaders, because it was important for our society. And
so when you got pregnant the first time, there was no maternity leave, or was there? There was none.
No, there was none. And I was still a student at the university at the time, but I had been approached to, I was in my fourth year of my university degree, and I was approached because they needed a teacher badly in a high school. I was a phys ed specialist, and they needed so I'd had my child by then, my first child, and I went to this Catholic high school. And while I was there, I got pregnant with my second child. And we had this, that was another one of those moments where I was being told by the school board, Catholic school board at the time, that I would have to leave. Not just take a leave, resign, that was it, you're pregnant, you're gone. And so I remember at the time saying, that is ridiculous. That is ridiculous. But we're talking back in the 70s, right? Yeah. Early 70s when that happened. So a lot has changed over the years, and rightly so. And yet there's this part of me that says, we've come a long way, yes, but we haven't come as far as we need to go.
No.
And I'm fearful that our younger generation, and I now talk from the perspective of having grandchildren who are, I have a granddaughter who is engaged to be married. So, I mean, she's that next generation who will be raising children, I'm presuming. And I look sometimes at the way that she operates, and I say, they take it for granted that all of these benefits are available to them, and they don't even stop to question the importance of it. And I think that we've, as an older generation, have missed the mark by not having conversations with our younger sisters about these things, because they need to understand that it's not something that can be taken for granted. It's not something that, and then you look at what's happening in the States now with women's rights. I mean, my goodness,
that has been,
it's, if we're not careful, we lose the ground that we've worked so hard to.
Yeah, and I've noticed that too. There's moments at a board of directors meeting, for example, where I see 50% women, 50% men. I think, great, we're doing great. And then with a snap of a finger, that can switch right over to 80-20, 80% men, 20. So it's like we're constantly in this battle to have women sitting at the table. And we've got to keep fighting all the time. But I think, we go back a little ways, you've really fought some really big battles and won battles for women in this province, which is incredible. Like, you've got to see all that happen. And I think that's a little bit of an issue with unionism now, is we don't see the big progress. It's very small, the little bits of progress. And sometimes even it's just fighting off some of the conservative ideas that are coming our way. So
we tend to, instead of looking at a big picture, we tend to look at the puzzle pieces, and sometimes we miss the fact that the big picture is fading if we're not careful. So we certainly, I think, have to be very aware of that. And that's why I'm saying that when I look at my future going forward, I mean, I've basically been retired now for 15 years, but have continued to be involved and active, because I still have this concern and this passion for making sure that our world is a good world for my grandchildren and great-grandchildren, maybe, to grow up in. But it's my responsibility also, as a senior member of this society, to make sure that my younger people hear that and listen to it. And it's not just some doddering old lady that's saying crazy things. It's that those things actually happened. We actually went through those stages. Salaries that when I first started, I was making $7,000 a year as a teacher. And over the years, we fought hard, and we've been on strike, and we've done all of the things we had to do, which were hard for us to do at that time, for the benefit. Salary equity. Oh my goodness.
Yes.
Salary equity. What a battle that was.
Yeah.
And it continues to be a battle. But my job, therefore, going forward, is to make sure that that message doesn't get lost.
Absolutely. And that's kind of why we're here today, because we should probably, we don't have a lot of time, but I'm like, God, we should just go through the history of unionism with you. You should write a book, Jan. I think that would
in my spare time.
But, today we're talking a little bit about your leadership journey and making sure, because, teachers, we're 75% to 80% of teachers are women. And we need to make sure that women are part of the voice going forward when it comes to all the decision making around education. So what kind of advice would you give a teacher that says, oh, I can't do what they're doing, there'd be no way, or maybe they never saw themselves as a leader and they're the ones that are asking questions, so what kind of advice would you give to
my advice would simply be, first of all, evaluate your own personal future. What is it that you as a person would like to do with your life? And dream big. Dream big, not just I want to make it till the holidays start on the 30th of June kind of dreaming, right? Dream big. And then what do you need to have in place in order for you to take those steps? So if you need, for example, to have conversations with your significant other about how you are going to handle the family work balance. Sometimes we as women tend to just say, oh, well, my husband's never going to do that and he's never going to, without ever having had the conversation with your significant other about what would be required in order for the family to grow and benefit and both parties, both partners involved, be equally involved in it. So that conversation is something that you need to have. You can't just decide you're going to all of a sudden do something, or say to yourself, I can't do it because he will never or she will never agree to it. You need to have that very serious conversation. The other thing is, look for the open windows. Understand that there are opportunities in life that sometimes don't look like an opportunity necessarily. They just look like, oh, that's interesting. Be interested. Fan the flames of creativity. That, to me, there's creativity involved there, of people who have the willingness to think outside the box, to offer suggestions that are outside the box. Don't be afraid to stand up and speak. Speak your mind. And if you feel like you can't do it alone, do it with a buddy.
That's a great advice.
Buddying is a very important thing. Somebody that you trust enough that you can phone them up and say, this opportunity is there. What do you think? What talk me through this, that kind of a thing. Or be that buddy to somebody else. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes when you're all by yourself, it's a hard decision to take. But if you can get some encouragement from somebody. So again, some of the leaders in the union movement, for example, some of the local executives of local unions, maybe some of the jobs they could be doing would be to be reaching out to some of their younger colleagues and offering that sort of mentorship type opportunities. Some of us retired folks could maybe have a role to play as being, mentors for our younger folks going forward. I ended my career in administration, and we have similar kinds of concerns and worries when you become an administrator, and sometimes even more exaggerated concerns than when you're in teaching, because our jobs are much more, they're much more widespread, and the time element is not calculated quite the same way. So you really have to be pushing back hard if you want to make room in your life for other things than just administration. So again, the mentorship piece of that is absolutely essential. I'm talking about it, and as I'm leaving my most recent job, thinking of some of the things I might offer to be able to do going forward, because I don't imagine I'm ever going to sit on my hands. That's not the way I
no, not after this long career that you've had.
So, what are some of the things that I could, I'm looking for my open windows.
Yes.
That's what I'm doing.
There's going to be more open windows for sure.
So that's my advice to young people, is to not be afraid to dream, not be afraid to ask the questions, and then seek advice from valued colleagues and friends and family, and have serious conversations with your family about it, including your children, by the way. My daughters, I had 2 daughters, and if they had not been as supportive as they were, not so much supportive as understanding of the crazy mother they had, I couldn't have done what I did either. So without them being on board with me, and I had the most exceptional husband in the whole world. coming from that generation, one could argue,
Right.
and particularly with his background in the French Catholic tradition, which was very much more difficult, I would say.
Yeah.
For him to have been as supportive of me as he was unusual at the time. For him to have stepped up and done things with the girls, and even that, for a father to be doing things with his daughters was like almost unheard of. If it had been boys, okay, we go out and play hockey, we do all our thing, but they were daughters, and my husband just rolled up his sleeves and did what he had to do with them, without a complaint and without. I mean, it was unusual.
Yeah.
Unusual. So without that kind of very important piece in place where you can have that conversation, and you know what? The other piece of advice I would say would be, if you need to take a break from it all, you do. Take time. If you need to take a leave of absence, for example, to be able to gather yourself and settle yourself and deal with some of the issues that might have been cropping up, don't be afraid to do that. Take time. Then you come back, you're refreshed, you're ready to go, and you move forward. You don't have to work the way we do quite as determinedly as we do.
We're terrible on. Because we fight for good working conditions.
Yeah, and then we
work extremely hard, don't we?
Exactly.
And another thing, I think women underestimate their capacities, unfortunately. I remember even when I was running for local union president, well, just before I decided to run, I had to be convinced by another woman. So I think that's our jobs, is to be tapping people on the shoulders as well and making sure that they realize that they are capable. If you're capable of herding cats, that's a in a classroom, then you're capable of doing leadership
just
jobs, I think.
Classroom, but herding them at home too, you know, like you herd them all in the classroom and then you go home and you herd them at home too. It's like,
yes, exactly. I know, it's,
you know,
crazy.
What I remember when you were I first met you were on the executive of PTU at the time.
Yes.
And I remember I came to help make picket signs, I think, and you were there making picket signs, and we started having this conversation, and I remember thinking to myself, this lady is going to be going forward. I can see this lady in leadership positions going forward. And little did I know that, like, very shortly after that,
there I was.
There you were.
There I was. Oh my God. I mean, you've got such an extensive career. Do you have any advice to give to your younger self? Like, if you could go back and give yourself advice, is there any advice that lessons learned, for example, that you would have?
I guess
there's a lot of thinking going on there.
A lot of thinking going on. Not so much in a critical way, but more from the perspective of, I often didn't put myself first. And I think that we need, as women, to put ourselves first every once in a while. Maybe not all the time, but instead of doing everything as if it was the only, you know, there's nobody else out there that can do this, I'm going to do it kind of attitude.
Yeah.
We need to take a step back and think about what is it that you, and that's sort of in line with what I just said about taking time.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, I remember at one point in my career, I was doing my master's. I was on the union executive at the time. I was teaching full time. I was running up and down to Ottawa because that's where my master's program was. And I burned out. And that next year I couldn't have lifted a finger if you'd asked me to.
Oh yeah.
Because I didn't watch myself well enough. I didn't give myself time and think of myself as being more important than some of the things I was doing at the time. So I think that's the biggest piece of advice for women, because we do tend to try and do it all.
Yeah, we do.
Take some time, think about yourself, and then move forward from there. Yeah.
Right. Well, I'm going to invite everybody that's listening to this to the pre-convention workshop, which is entitled Women in Leadership, Empowering Each Other. And Jan is going to be there. I'm really, really excited. So we'll hear a lot from you on October the 12th from 9 to 3 is the workshop, but you'll be there as a special guest to talk to the people that come to the workshop. So I hope everybody will come. We have a lot of special guests, including you. So that is going to be really, really exciting. But you know what, Jan, I think we're going to have to do another one of these about the history of unionism and maybe go back in time and take some key moments. Like I'm thinking of the 70s and the 80s when you guys went out on strike for weeks, and now we still do that, and we'll be looking for a strike mandate probably in the fall, but it's nothing compared to illegal strikes that took place in the 70s and very long strikes in the 80s where you had a real uphill battle against governments in the time.
You know, we had not just uphill battles, but we had ethical battles amongst ourselves, because for teachers at that time, in those years, the idea of going on strike was like completely against the grain of what a teacher considered herself to be. Mainly her, because even in those days it was a lot of women who for them the idea of a strike had everything to do with, you know, blue collar striking, and they didn't want
that association, right?
And so the uphill battle for us as leaders at the time was to encourage them to take a stand, and that this was the way to take a stand. But yeah, it was challenging for sure.
Yeah, I think we need to have a really good conversation about those challenging times, because I think that would be really, really interesting. Any last words before I say goodbye?
Oh my goodness. Well, you know, last words that I'm going to say to you, Heidi, because you are going on to a bigger and incredible challenge at CTF, the Canadian Teachers Federation, and I can't be more than delighted that you're doing that, because A, you're a woman, B, you're from Quebec, and you're young, and you're full of enthusiasm, and that's what we need in our ranks, whether it's local, provincial, or across the country. We need people like you. So keep doing it. Keep doing it.
Well, thank you so much, Jan. It's been so great to be working just across the hall from you for only, unfortunately, the pandemic, we didn't see much each other for a couple of years, but thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. But we're gonna see you in October, and like I said, I think we're gonna have to do a second podcast. Really.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you.
Take care.